Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I wanted to talk to you about some sad news that occurred last week on June 2nd. But before we get to that news, the footage you're looking at in front of you is from a Game Lab Games called Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. It's a game that's currently in a closed early access. You can buy it directly through their website on Game Labs, but it's not available on Steam yet. And the game is still very much in an early access sort of phase. The campaign for the game isn't there yet. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But what I wanted to open with here in today's video is, like I said, some sad news. On June 2nd of this year, so just what, 5 days ago, James Hornfischer passed away. For those of you who don't know who James Hornfischer is, he is, in my opinion, the closest thing I have come to someone being, you know, a literary writer of history in the vein of Bruce Catton of the American Civil War. So Bruce Catton wrote actually two separate American Civil War trilogies in the 1950s and I believe 60s. He was a phenomenal writer. You could say, you know, similar to someone like Shelby Foote, just an absolutely tremendous writer. The history jumped off the pages at you. You know, this person, Mr. Catton, was a writer and then a historian. And I feel like especially in the modern era, to me it seems like a lot of historians are historians first, and I think this has always been true, and writers second. And that's not a knock. Like, I like history, I read a lot of history, but there's not a lot of people who can really write a tremendous historical novel and not make you feel like you're missing something. And that's what James Hornfischer was able to do. He was one of the few historians who wrote, I think, in the modern era in a way that it was sort of what people refer to as pop history. Usually is kind of like well-written history, and easy to read and easily digestible. But I think the knock against pop history is a lot of times sort of that lighter, easy-to-read history loses a lot of its depth and complexity, and it doesn't always have all of the pertinent information. And so I think there's often, in the school of history, there's often two schools of historians. There's the pop historians who are writing books with the desire to, you know, make a living being an author, and then there are the academic historians who are PhDs at universities, and they are researchers, and their job is to research history, you know, understand why things happen, and then take their findings and write a book about it, right? And so you often get these and I'm massively oversimplifying, but you often get these sort of two approaches. You get sort of this dry, you know, not super approachable, very in-depth, you know, from a historical perspective, very interesting approach to history, but one that does not really filter out to the rest of the world. And then you have the pop historians who write approachable stuff, but maybe isn't super up to date on the scholarly work. Maybe it isn't as reliable as the scholarly work, or frankly, I think most of the times, it's just stuff gets left out because it's, you know, you're writing a 200-page, a 300-page book with the interest of just covering a topic and making it something that people enjoy to read, and whatnot. And the reason I'm going over all of this is James Hornfischer was the kind of historian that, reading his books, I felt like I got a tremendous amount of detail. I felt like I was getting as much information and substance as someone who was reading an academic history, while at the same time being written in a way that is incredibly approachable, incredibly interesting to read, and the history really jumped off the pages at you. And so I just wanted to kind of share that he passed away. I mean, I was a huge fan of his work. He was only 55 years old. I mean, that is very young in the first place, but certainly in the vein of a lot of like historians who are out there writing these days that are kind of more mainstream. You know, he was a lot of books left unwritten, and you know, it's really a shame, you know, obviously on the human side, you know, for his family and himself. and sort of on the history side, just a tremendous loss. You know, he wrote a couple of well-regarded books. The Last Stand of the Tin Can Soldiers was very well written, or very well regarded, sorry. And that was about the Battle of Samar. So the Taffy 3, the Japanese battleships attacking the American escort carriers during the invasion of the Philippines. He wrote Ships of Ghosts, which is actually a story, or not a story, it's a history about the USS Houston, which was the United States flagship of its small flotilla, small squadron, based out of the Philippines at the start of World War II. And the Houston would flee from the Philippines and Japanese occupation, ending up in the Dutch East Indies with sort of a motley force of Australian and British and Dutch and American warships trying to stop the Japanese invasion of the Dutch East Indies. And Ship of Ghosts is the story of the USS Houston, which was one of those treaty cruisers, and tells the story of the Battle of the Java Sea, which from the Houston's perspective, which you don't typically see in any American-centric histories. How often do you hear about the Battle of the Java Sea? I think Ian Toll's Pacific Crucible touched on it very briefly, but you rarely hear that part of the Pacific theater from an American-centric perspective. And then I think what his two finest works, from my perspective, were Neptunes Inferno, which is a book about the Guadalcanal campaign, U.S. Navy specifically in the Guadalcanal campaign. So the battles of Savo Island, Naval Guadalcanal, all of that. And the Fleet at Flood Tide, which looks at the United States in the Pacific from 1944 to 45. And as you may guess from the title, really deals with the counterstroke of that starts largely focusing on the Marianas campaign, with the attacks on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, and then the subsequent further offensives that would lead to the victory in the Pacific for the United States and the Allied forces. Neptunes Inferno is a tremendous book, and that is one of those books that, you know, I remember reading through that, and when you hit the Battle of Savo Island, I think Hornfisher's talents really come to light, because he's telling in immense detail the way the battle is unfolding and what's happening on these ships, but it's written almost more like a novel, like in the way that the descriptions just sort of jump off the pages at you. You know, I don't think I've ever read anything that talked about just that was able to convey the sheer horror, or what I would imagine would be the sheer horror of being on a treaty cruiser, you know, a lightly armed cruiser, you know, that 8-inch shells are gonna slice through like butter, and getting hit by enemy armor-piercing rounds, those rounds detonating inside the ship, the effect on the ship, the effect on the men. You know, it reads like a horror novel in a sense, and it really does, I think, shed some light on some stuff that often, you know, you hear like, oh, the ship was sunk and this many people died, and I think there's a good number of histories on land combat that can kind of deal with, you know, the fear and just the war as hell aspect of it. But I think Neptunes Inferno really does a tremendous job, whether it's the battle of Savo Island, or I forget the name of it, the battle where the Japanese were gonna go in and bombard the Americans, but then an American squadron sort of intercepted them, and so the Japanese, their battleships were firing like basically HE rounds against cruisers, and their cruisers were also, and so you had this, like, basically it's just high explosive shells tearing into superstructures, not penetrating into the vitals of the ship, but starting just horrific fires and things like that, and these ships like glowing in the dark. Overall, though, just Neptunes Inferno is a really great book. I would highly recommend you check out Neptunes Inferno, The Fleet at Flood Tide. I think again, the book that really got Hornfisher noticed was the Last Stand of the Tin Can Soldiers, which was also his first. I have never read that. I will be making a point to go back to and look at that. as well as Sea of Ghosts, which I actually got as a gift from my mom a few years ago. I forget what it was, like for Saint Nick or something like that. And so I've read that, but definitely recommend checking out his works. It's really sad news in my opinion. I think you know, he was if you were looking around and saying like, who are the up and coming history authors out there that can broaden the field and really bring history in a way that people resonate with, I think Hornfisher was up there, and his audible versions are also very good. I've listened to the audible version of the Fleet at Flood Tide, and that is very well done as well. So whether you would like to listen to the books, read the books, however you want to do that, definitely recommend checking his works out. He did write another book, which I have no idea anything about it, but it was Service a Navy SEAL at War. And so I guess that would be his full bibliography at that point. He was also a literary agent. He was involved with other folks who were writing their own books as well. But yeah, James Hornfisher dead at 55. Sad news. One other thing I'll say, just since I've got you guys, I know I didn't have a video yesterday. Still getting things situated with the child, so not as much time to play games lately. But one other thing I did want to mention is that the game you're looking at is Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts by Game Labs. They said this like months ago, and then several patches released since. But at least according to the most recent patch, they are saying that the first version of the campaign, which will be a scaled down version of the campaign of this game, is supposed to come out with the next patch. So if that comes out, I will probably stream a fair bit of that game, and I will also, obviously cover it on my YouTube channel here as well. I'm excited about Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. It's basically a 3D version of Rule the Waves. You design your own ships and then you fight them. Except in Rule the Waves, it's all kind of spreadsheet and then very basic maps. In this, obviously, you've got sort of 3D renderings of your ship in port as you kind of add or remove things, almost like building a Lego set of ships, and then you get to go sail them and fight them. Right now, the game is available in a closed sort of alpha or whatnot directly through Game Lab's website, so you can buy it through there. It's not on Steam yet, but the game right now is basically just like 56 sort of training missions where you are given a task to design a ship to defeat a certain enemy, and then you also have some custom battle options where you can build random fleets or build one of the ships in the random fleets and fight them, and that's what you're watching right now. I'm going to cover that a lot on the channel when the campaign comes out, as I'm sure of a lot of other folks. I'm sure Tortuga will. I know originally he was very excited. I think the development issues with them may have soured some of his excitement, but I am sure he's going to play it. Maybe Wolf will play it. I don't know. I'm sure HGG already plays a ton of it. So I'm sure there will be a lot of stuff out there on YouTube. I will try to do my best to not be crap. But if this battle that you're watching is any sign of how I fight, this is not a good sign. It's been a while since I played this game. I played this a fair bit on the channel 2 years ago when it first sort of came out in this limited sense. But it is, I don't know. I'm not good at designing ships. I'm not good at captaining them. I don't think anyway. So we'll see. But yeah, guys, just want to let you know that's, I think, coming soon, hopefully. But we'll see. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts below. Links in the description as always. And until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying once again, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, I'm out.